Welcome to Variations 4. This is the unit on shock. In this video, we'll cover question number 7, talking about the physiology of septic shock. There's quite a bit in your notes. I've tried to keep it simple here, and so actually I think the easiest way to go through this, rather than looking at these figures in the PowerPoints, which you're free to do, they're very correct, but they can be a bit overwhelming. So I've kind of broken it down into kind of 3 main issues. This is what you should really focus on when you're thinking of the physiology of septic shock. So issue number 1 is that, and of course, the whole thing of sepsis. Usually people, they could start out with an infection in the lungs. It could go to the bloodstream. An infection could start with a UTI, it could go to the bloodstream, or, I mean, they could just start with an infection in the bloodstream right off the bat. The bottom line is sepsis is infection or bacteria, some kind of organism right in the bloodstream, going through the whole body. Bottom line, it's causing a systemic inflammatory response. So let's start with issue 1. You've got this invading organism. First thing, it initiates, should be a little S here, that initiates systemic inflammatory response. Sorry, I'm a stickler for spelling here. Initiates a systemic mediators that initiate a systemic inflammatory response. Now we know what that means. We know that that means dilation and permeability to the vessels. We've seen this time and time again. Fluid leaks out into tissues. Okay, so we end up with this maldistribution of blood vessel fluid in the tissues, yielding decreased blood pressure in the vessels, leading decreased tissue perfusion. So that's issue number 1. And depending on how bad that is and what organs that's affecting, you could anticipate head-to-toe symptomology in terms of decreased level of consciousness, decreased GI functioning, et cetera, as you move through each system. We've talked about the stuff above already with other cases of shock. You really should be prepared to draw a stick person and go from head to toe and address each system and how it would be affected by shock, that is decreased perfusion to organs. What does that look like? You should be prepared to do that for any of the shocks. Okay, anyways, that's issue 1, that decreased tissue perfusion. Issue 2 is this thing called disseminated intravascular coagulation. Now, we are going to cover that in the next section, so just hold that thought, but that is issue number 2. And it comes up, DIC comes up a lot with sepsis. We're going to cover that in another section that's coming up. Excuse me. But the bottom line, just so I can get it in there, the bottom line with DIC is that you've got widespread coagulation as well as increased bleeding risk. And you're going to wonder why that is. We're going to talk about that later, but that's what comes up with it. And we'll get more into that later. So issue number 3 is this hypermetabolic state, which is kind of common for many illnesses, but the body increases its demands. It's in a fight or flight mode. Makes sense. Blood sugars go up. Pretty typical with fight or flight or stress response. This increased metabolic rate increases the need for O2 and oxygen, and it makes everything worse because now we have these increased needs for O2 and nutrients and whatnot. But our circulation and perfusion has gone down, so it just spirals. And really, this could be said of many of any shock, really. Okay, we'll come back to aspects of sepsis later, but those are the 3 main issues overall. And that's all we're covering in this particular video.